Welcome to ADF Clergy Tea Time, the second pouring. This is the second edition in a series of online panel discussions that feature several members of our ADF Clergy. In this series of panels, we will be getting to know them better, discover more about their experiences, and how best to engage with them in their roles as clergy. This panel discussion was recorded in February 2022.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ADF Clergy Tea Time, the second pouring. We had the first pouring back in November, and now we're having our second pouring. So thank you all for joining us. I see we have 33 participants, including all of the panelists. That's a great turnout. So thank you all for the audience members for coming. Let me just talk to you a little bit about how we're going to do this today if it is your first time. Let me find my notes here. So we're going to have a panel discussion with our clergy members, and this ADF's Clergy Tea Time is designed to let the Druids of ADF and other people, I know there are other people on the channel as well, to get to know our clergy members. This was born of a conversation sometime last year where somebody said, you know, we have this huge list of clergy people, but I don't know anything about them, and I feel a little intimidated to be able to talk to them. So this panel discussion is to alleviate that problem, allow you to get to know the clergy of ADF better, and make them more approachable so that you can go and talk to them in the future. The way this is going to work is I'm the host. I'm your host, Hobbes. I'm a Druid I live in Montreal, on the tropical island of Montreal, and I'm a member of Thornhaven Grove. I'm going to be the host and the moderator for this panel discussion. I have prepared a list of questions that I'm going to ask our panelists here, and they're going to answer them to the best of their ability. They already know some of the questions, but they don't know them all. So they're a little on the hot seat. There's no telling what I might ask them. And then we're going to go through an hour and a half of that. And then the last 30 minutes, I'm going to open the floor to the people who are sitting on the Zoom call, and God knows what they're going to ask. And they can ask the clergy whatever they want. Before we get started, though, I'm going to make the First Nations declaration, and I'm going to invite the panelists to speak out the First Nation tribes that are in their area. So we begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional and unceded territory of, for me, the Carrion Mann, the Mohawk, and the Algonquin. And to the panelists.
I live on the land of the Shawnee, the Miami, and the Hopewell, and I'm going to turn it to Michael because he has some of our Grove stuff.
So my own home is located on ancestral and contemporary territory of the Hopewell and the Miami, also known as the Miami peoples. But in addition, our Grove, through Caryn's Grove ADF, does ritual on land that is the ancestral and contemporary territory of the Adena, Hopewell, Shawnee, Osage, Potawatomi, Delaware, Miami, Peoria, Seneca, Wyandot, Ojibwe, and Cherokee peoples. We are very broad here in central Ohio. Specifically, much of our work is founded on and continues on lands ceded in the 1795 Treaty of Grenville and the forced removal of tribes through the Indian Removal Act of 1830. And it is our fervent hope that our work will continue to hold this land sacred, despite how we may have come to it.
Okay. Caryn? Caryn, we can't hear you.
Okay. I'm not muted. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. All right. The Cedar Lake Grove is in Baltimore, Maryland, and that was traditionally the land of the Kanoi. But we have people that come from all over. And so if you look around the Chesapeake Bay, you know, there was a lot of indigenous peoples that lived there, including the Powhatan, the Nanticoke, and the Susquehanna are some of the big names. And I have a lovely little invocation to add before ritual. And if you think I could find it today, oh, no. But we hail them.
All right. Thank you, Caryn. And Carrion.
Well, I am from the region known as the Land of the Living Snowflakes, so named Conneaut by the native people who lived here, which were the Eries, the Iroquois, and the Corn Planter tribes. So that is both where my home is and also where a large part of our grove practice, Whispering Lake Groves practice, takes place, and those were the tribes associated with it.
All right, thank you, Carrion. So these are all places which have long served as sites of meeting and exchange among nations. We give thanks to the people who have cared for these lands throughout the generations, throughout all that has been and all that will be, and who have brought us all to this moment in time. So that is so there we go. Before we get started, I know that I put out some, leading up to this event, we put out biographies of all the panelists, but I would like to take a moment now to ask the panelists to introduce themselves before we get started. So we're going to do this alphabetically. So Jan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I am Jan. I use they or she pronouns. I am one of the priests of Three Cranes Grove alongside Michael, who is also a panelist today. Within ADF, I am a consecrated priest, which is the second circle. And then I'm also an initiate and the preceptor of the initiate program. I do a lot of my work beyond the Grove as creating kid-friendly and family-friendly and parent-focused resources to kind of make sure that our work is accessible to everyone of all age and education levels. I also just started a job doing higher ed chaplaincy. That's me.
All right, thank you, Jan. Michael?
So I'm Reverend Michael J. Dangler, and my pronouns are he, him, his. I realized that my display name had reverted away from that, so I had to fix that just now. I would invite others to also do that if you haven't. I've been an ADF member since 2001. I am currently a past senior druid, and along with Reverend Avende, a Grove priest of Three Cranes Grove ADF here in Columbus, Ohio. I did a little bit of work fleshing out the ADF dedicant path, including leading some revisions to the requirements some 15 years ago. And my Wheel of the Year document has helped a couple of people get through the DP. I completed the dedicant path documentation in May of 2003, became a dedicant priest in 2006, and a senior priest in 2010. I was fortunate to become one of ADF's first two trialed initiates in 2009 with Reverend Kirk Thomas. Since then, my work has become more and more about creating accessible resources for people doing the work of modern druidry. You can find some of that work at the physical store that I co-own, which is The Magical Druid, but the bulk of that work is done on Patreon these days, where I found an easy way to share resources with folks who are interested. ADF Druidry is my sole and primary path these days. I do some magical work for hire here and there, but mostly it's Druidry.
All right, thank you, Michael. I believe next is Caryn.
Hello, I am Caryn Macluan. I've been in ADF since 1999. I've been pagan since the mid 70s. I'm retired Coast Guard Chief Warrant Officer 3. So I've been all over the country in the Coast Guard, and I am a consecrated priest, and I'm one of 3 priests at Cedar Light with Reverend Francesca Hedrick and Reverend Crystal Groves. What I'm focusing on most these days, and it seems like this has been going on forever sometimes, is that our grove, it has its own house, its own property. And that house is going to be turning 100 in 2 years. So an awful lot of my work involves the upkeep of this building and the sanctuaries and gardens that we have all around it. And this week, this is particularly in my brain because we've been up there 3 times this week to try to coax the boiler into actually heating the entire house, because we have tenants upstairs. And that's that's very different than a lot of the other priests have to deal with. I mean, we all deal with it in our own homes in one way or another, but we don't have a separate site that is our grove. And I can tell you that having done this 22 years at this point, I have a love-hate relationship with that building. And I've learned more about lead paint than I ever wanted to know. But and I've learned more about zoning and permits to do things like have a prayer garden in the backyard, and in all of that. And still I'm trying to, you know, do the work of a priest, and I really want to finish the clergy training program. And I've been worn every different leadership hat in the Grove over the years. It's kind of like musical hats and chairs. Every couple of years we all switch. And I've been on the Mother Grove, I've been on the Clergy Council officers, I've been the chief of the Council of Senior Druids. So I've worn a whole lot of hats, and I'm really, really good at volunteering for more than I can humanly possibly do. So that's me.
All right. Thank you, Caryn. And lastly, Carrion.
Hi, all. I'm Caryn, and I am a senior priest in ADF. I'm also a Grove priest for Whispering Lake Grove. Over the years, I have held numerous positions, both locally and internationally, because I guess when it boils down to it, I am a very human service bent person. So professionally, I work in the field of human services. I'm both a director of a not-for-profit human service organization and also a mental health therapist. And in ADF, you know, it's kind of works out that the service looks like service to the living and the dead, because I'm probably most well known in the organization for my work with the dead. And I guess that I see that as service, you know, serving the kindred first and foremost, serving living and once living folks to the best of my ability has kind of been, I guess, my lifelong mission, if you could have one. I've been a member of ADF since 2001. Prior to that, I was a Gardnerian priestess. I've been a pagan for a long time. I'm excited to participate in today's event, and I'm open to pretty much anything and everything anybody would want to ask. So that's Caryn in a nutshell.
All right, thanks, Caryn. Before we get started on the questions, I just want to remind everyone that we do have a chat. There's a chat window here in the Zoom chat. I'm going to try to keep an eye on that, if there's anything coming up, and remind you that at the end of this, at basically around at 2:30, we're going to open the floor to the people here on the in the audience to ask our panelists anything they like. So if you think of questions while we're moving along, I invite you to write them down for yourselves, not to forget, so that you can ask them at the end of the panel discussion. So I'm going to unpin myself now. And all right, so welcome, panelists. Thank you very much for taking time out of your day to join us today on this panel discussion. I'm really looking forward to it. Let's start with the first question, which I had told you about. So I'd like to invite each of you to talk about how you decided to become clergy. Like, how did you know that being clergy in ADF was the right decision for you? Because it is a ton of work to get there, and it's not a lark. So what motivated you? How did you know that you wanted to be clergy? The first person to speak is the first person to speak. I can point. I'm not above it.
I can talk about that.
All right.
I can talk about that. It's kind of an unusual, story. I don't know, as a pagan, as somebody who is into helping, since the time that I was a Gardnerian, I have been involved in the creation of liturgy, both specially, liturgy, and also, open to the public kinds of liturgy. And I got myself into a situation where I needed to become a universal life minister online because I had to have some legitimacy, even in my early, ADF days, to being able to marry and bury and do those functions that people who were coming to me needed in the community. Okay. So I was fine doing it that way. And for years, and married tons of people, buried people, performed other specialty ritual. And then a scary thing happened in the state of Pennsylvania. And there was some proposed legislation. It was a bill called 1099. It happened in I don't know, probably 2005, 6. It was scary because what was being proposed is that folks without a recognized congregation with Universal Life Church certificates to marry and so forth and so on, that their marriages were going to be nullified. Okay, that really bothered me. And ADF Clergy and the program and things had been out there. I had been, involved with the Grove since 2003, and we were just kind of going along, serving the kindred and serving the folk. And then this scary thing happened in the state. So I decided, because I was not going to have people that, my intention was to, create sacred unions or whatever else and serve them. I was not going to have their, marriages and things overturned. So I embarked on formalizing my clergy studies so that I could be ordained and just kind of continued that work. So it was kind of about service and about making sure that people were protected in the services that I was doing.
All right, thank you. Who's next? If you remember the question, what is it that drove you to motivate you to become clergy? Caryn, go ahead.
I'll jump. All right. So my story goes back to 1999 when I had it started before I joined ADF, but it moved through that entire year. And it's the story, you will find it in many different cultures in many different ways, but basically it's the story of the wounded healer who has to heal themselves. And then when you come through that rite of passage, it's kind of an awakening. And long story short, I had a very deadly cancer. And when I found out about this is when the gods came into my life, particularly Bridget. And when I got to the other side, 3 months of chemo and all this other stuff, and realized I'm probably going to be all right. I asked her at a ritual, it was at Samhain, what she wanted in return. And she said, service to my people for the rest of your life. And I went, done. So along came 2003 and the opportunity for senior druids who'd been senior druids for 2 years to apply to the clergy program came along. And with that, it was kind of a provisional ordination, and it required you to finish the first circle. Well, back then it was finish all 3 circles, and that changed over the years. But at any rate, that is how I ended up there, and I've been there ever since. And I take that oath very seriously.
All right, thank you, Caryn. All right, Jan, Michael, which one would you like to speak first?
I'll go. I think I am the odd one out here in that I really fought against becoming clergy for quite a while, didn't want to do it. And even still consider myself kind of in this position of initiate first, because I worked my way through the initiate program before I even considered becoming clergy. And Michael likes to refer to it as I was standing on the train tracks and the clergy train hit me because apparently he saw it way before I did that I was going to do this whole clergy thing. But for me, a lot of that like resistance came from this, this internal feeling that our grove already had several priests and there was nothing for me to do there, which was totally wrong. There's always more work to go around. But for me, it kind of came once I finished the initiate work, which is a very internal kind of learn about yourself and develop your own deep practice thing, that then I was able to shift that focus to outward service. And for me, it definitely started more on a level of converting a lot of my resources in my work towards the folk until kind of this culmination of people started referring to me as their priest. And I found out that they'd been thinking that before I was ordained. And it was this whole like, oh, I guess I can actually do this thing kind of feeling. So for me, I fought against the call to clergy for a long time. And it is totally worth it. And I'm glad that I accepted it, but it was not my initial intention to do this kind of work. I love it now, but it was not my intention initially.
All right, Jan, and now Michael.
So, yes, Jan's vocation sounds like a train coming down the tracks. Mine sounds a little bit different. It sounds different to everybody. I used to describe my calling in pretty generic terms. I don't think that I really knew how I heard it or what it sounded like. I have a solid idea of what it sounds like now, though, and what it looks like. And I can delve into that a little bit later if you really want. I like to think about the decision about whether to become a priest as if it's a game of snakes and ladders. Dave Walker's cartoon, The Discernment Process, is a frighteningly accurate presentation of the process in my mind, and I encourage you to look it up. In fact, I'll drop it into the chat. He's Anglican, but man, is it relevant. Anyway, we have these vocational statements that we have to write to become ADF priests, and you can read my vocational statement and my ordination application if you want. They are both on my website. But when I originally spoke about why I wanted to be a priest, I didn't really know how to explain it. I fell back on the notion of, oh, this is the work I've been doing. This is what it's like. This is priesting. It's showing up where I'm needed. It's leading ritual. It's being responsible for the spiritual development of people. But when I think that, well, I think that that vocation was clear and indeed quite vocal, I don't think that I really knew what it was. Vocation is not a single, immutable, unchanging experience of reflection and discernment, in my opinion. It's something that you grow into. One of the things that I said in the statement, though, has definitely held true. It is not a destination. It is a path, and I am still walking it.
All right, thank you, Michael. Now, what are your, as clergy people, what are your responsibilities beyond ADF? So not only putting aside your responsibilities to the membership, what responsibilities do you have to the pagan community, not even the pagan community, the world at large, your community, pagan community, local to the world? Like, what are your responsibilities outside of ADF as clergy?
I'll start. So there's the kind of thing that like Caryn was talking about with her initial ULC membership. And that's this, you're marrying people outside of your immediate community. The pagan community will come to you and they need someone to marry them and you're the person for it. So like, that's kind of a general, I think we probably have all run into that as service to our wider communities. For me in particular, I mentioned earlier that one of the things that I do that I am very passionate about is this raising pagan kids. And there's simply not a lot of resources out there for that. And part of my work that I consider for the larger pagan community is providing those resources for families to raise their children pagan, if that's what they so choose. So there's that. And then the other piece of that is I'm very interested in chaplaincy and just started a job at Otterbein as an affiliate chaplain, which is essentially I'll be serving the pagans there on an interfaith board, an interfaith collection of other chaplains. And it's great because pagans don't really have the same ability. We don't have an endorsing body. We don't have a lot of the bureaucratic nonsense that goes into becoming a professional chaplain. And so finding other interfaith leaders who are able to like vouch for you and make that happen for you has been really important. So I'll be serving a student body of questioning folks as well as people who actually identify as pagan. Yeah, I think that kind of covers what I do outside of ADF community.
All right, thank you, Jen. Caryn, how do you feel about that?
Well, I agree with the whole lot. I also find that the people that come to me for weddings do not want an ADF ceremony. They want something that is pagan-ish, but isn't going to upset everybody that isn't pagan in the ceremony, which is fine. I don't mind doing that. I'm also I went back to school after I got out of the military for herbalism and got a graduate certificate in that. So I sometimes give workshops and classes and teach people how to make herbal things. I'm very in touch with the land. I love my gardens. I love the gardens at the Grove. I love the gardens at my house. I have way too many than I could ever humanly possibly tend. And I also am a Reiki master. So I teach Reiki out of the Grove. It's for Grove members, but it's for anybody in the public that wants to come. Those are just some of the things. I also volunteer in some other pagan groups, heathen groups, for festivals and events. And it's mostly within the greater pagan community. I'm very much an advocate of lead by example. And I'm very, very deeply environmentalist, so I'm involved in those kinds of things also. And that's about it.
All right, thank you, Caryn. Caryn, I'd like to ask you that question, but I just had a thought while Caryn was talking, when Jan was talking. Your responsibilities outside of ADF, are these personal choices that you're making, that you're deciding to take your clergy training and apply it to the greater community? Or is that part of clergy training where they say you do not only service the needs of the druidry, of the members of ADF, but you also have a responsibility outside? So which is it part of being an ADF clergy that you deal with the outside world, or is that a personal choice that each clergy person makes?
I think it depends how you define folk. So part of our oath is to serve the folk. And so if you defined folk as just the folk of ADF, then that would be specifically your ADF clergy training. For me, I defined folk as whoever looks to me as priest. And so that includes that larger community, as well as the outreach work to folks who are pagan or are considering being pagan and don't have an idea of where to start or the resources to begin with. So I think it depends on how you define folk, and we may all define that differently, and that's fine.
And I think to add on top of that, anybody who is a priest in a grove knows that ADF groves have a community service component to them. And in that, I guess I've always been part of a local group that really, even though we identify as ADF Druids, we don't put blinders on to the service of community. So it is serving humans, serving, maybe it would be, organizations that help animals in the community. And our community service has always been far reaching. Basically, to anybody who would accept our help or needed our help or ask for our help. I have a really loose definition of who I consider folk. Like Jan was talking about, some of that is you have to determine individually. But I guess I use a wide paintbrush. It's people in need of help or people who ask for help.
Okay, all right.
Do you want me to answer that too, Hobbes?
Sure. Feel free, take the floor.
I would say that I am a priest all the time. It influences everything I do. It doesn't matter where I am or what I'm doing at that point. I'm always a priest, and this has affected me greatly in a lot of things and decisions I'd made during the pandemic. But I was also going over and talking to my next door neighbor whose husband for the last 2 years has been fighting cancer, and just holding space for her and being someone that she could talk to. She's not a Druid. In this process, I found out she attends a friend's gathering, she's Quaker. But she was very appreciative that, facing the death of her husband and helping him with how this process is going to go. So yeah, it's not just ADF people.
All right. I had another side question to ask, but Michael, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I'd be happy to, but first I want to make sure that, because the question went a little bit sideways there, I want to make sure that Caryn got everything that she wanted to say out before I chipped in on that.
Caryn, you're muted. Caryn, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I just was going to say, I think we can answer the side question and then it'll come back to me and I'll talk about outside responsibilities. So go ahead, Michael.
Sounds good to me. I just didn't want to step on that. For me, I think of ADF as being heavily focused on public accessible ritual, which means that for me, priesting is indeed work for all. By that, I mean my religious work, my magical work, anything that falls under this priestly umbrella. I don't think that ADF places any specific mandate on our priests to reach out and do work for other people outside of our groves or outside of our larger ADF community. But I think that the tradition that is ADF Druidry in particular is public facing. Paganism in general, to me, is a civic religion. It all faces outwards, and the work that we do, it needs to be accessible. It needs to be available to everybody. So yes, the work that I do does face out into the public. I don't necessarily think that it's a requirement of the work, but I think that there's a very strong current within ADF that pushes for that and that helps us to move in that direction whenever we are planning our work, or even when we are not planning it, it just sort of falls on top of us. That happens often enough to all of us, I'm sure.
Okay. Well, actually, while you were all answering that question, I had a thought, which was, now when I think about the pagan community at large, there is as part of our culture, there's a certain distaste or even distrust of authority figures. And so since you see yourselves as priests all the time, and when you reach out beyond the ADF context to do your priesting, do you find that there's a certain amount of pushback from the general pagan community saying, well, I mean, you're a priest, because a lot of pagans see themselves as their own priests. And so do you face any kind of pushback from the general pagan community when you come out and say, I am an ADF priest or clergy? Do they just accept it, or do they say, well, show me your credentials, or I don't recognize your authority, or things like that?
I think, to answer that, it's about how you approach the subject with people, and knowing, who's approaching you, I guess. Because I'm not one that separates, my being an ADF priest from who and what I am either. But it's really not, something I go right into a conversation with. I guess that I'm more of an all-around professional helper, and I use the title of ADF priest, so to speak, when situations need me to, if that makes any kind of sense. So if I am legally signing someone's marriage certificate, I will put Reverend in front of my title. If somebody is seeking me because I am a clergy person, because that means something to them, then I pay more attention to using that title, I guess. I think it can be a stumbling block if you put it out there like it's a hierarchy, or it's something that makes us better than. We have, to me, we have knowledge and we have skills that we've trained for that can be helpful. But if somebody doesn't want that help, or, views it in a negative way, you're not going to help them. So, I think approach is everything, and knowing what somebody is looking for as far as help. And when that, it makes good sense to do that. And then I don't think you get the pushback or the resistance to helping somebody if it's done in a non-threatening way, if that makes sense.
I would absolutely agree with that. It's not a merit badge. Like, it's not a, look what I've done. Hello world, I am Reverend Jan Avende. Like, it's not a like, I'm always introducing myself that way. To most people, I'm just Jan. I'm a pretty out pagan, and I'm pretty out about my priest work, but that's not how I lead every conversation. Honestly, I use the Rev title most often because government forms don't have mix as a title. And so the drop-down menus let me pick Rev, which is great. So there's that as like a sidebar. But when people are coming to you as a priest, like, they're already expecting your skills and your services as a priest. If you're just a member of a community, like, you can share your knowledge, but you don't have to be like, here's why I know these things, unless they ask you like, well, how did you learn this? And then you can kind of fill that out.
Anyone else have any experiences to share?
No, I agree with both Jan and Carrion. It's just, I put the title on when I need it. And if I'm like at a festival or someplace where I'm not there as clergy, at least in the main rituals and all, I might wear my ADF sigil, but I probably won't wear my stole, simply because I can easily, in my robes and garb, outshine flashy priest, the ritual team that they're doing that, and that's not my goal. I'm there to be a participant, not a liturgist, and I'm not trying to out priest the priests that are doing it. So no, I haven't had any pushback really. I've been to a lot of festivals and heathen events, and every people respect ADF a lot more than you might think.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'll cut in on that as well. You'll note that mine is the only display name that has Reverend in front of it. I use it almost exclusively when I'm doing stuff for ADF. which is why everyone sees it, because you all see what I do for ADF because it's what I do. But I also use it to describe kind of the work that I do, and that has been helpful to me as well. But I agree very much, particularly with Caryn, and when she was talking about how, how you approach it makes all the difference. I'm a big fan of our study program. I'm very proud of the study that I have done and the study that I've seen other people do. And everybody who comes to this program does it really well, and they're doing great at it. And I want to make sure that they also feel acknowledged by that. So when I reply to emails, I reply, Reverend Avende said this, or Reverend Thomas or Reverend Pagano. I try and use that title as well, as a way of showing respect to the work that they have done. Because, we're all in this together. We've all done this work. We're all equally qualified. We're all on the same footing, and none of us is any better than the other. So I use the title then in an effort to show that also. So.
Okay, thank you, Reverend Michael. Oh, I saw that. Did you see that? All right. What social justice issues are you passionate about, and how do you incorporate them into your ministry? If any.
I'm looking at Michael because he's got a bunch.
I'll give that a shot. Why not? So for me, the one that I am most passionate about is accessibility. So it's not enough to provide equality. You have to go out of your way and step beyond putting people on equal footing and find a way not just to give access to people, but to go out of our way to be inclusive and to provide that accessibility. And it's important for me in this conversation to note that I am not physically disabled. I am generally neurotypical, but because of this, I have to approach this from a constant process of learning and questioning and relearning. And I make a lot of mistakes in the process, I know. But I've gotten deeper into this as well over the years. So now it's not enough for me to say, oh, here's a gender neutral word for the deities. It's part of my responsibility as an ADF priest to actively use that word myself regularly in ritual. If you're curious, that word is Godin, which I've used more than once in almost every ritual that I've done recently. It doesn't belong to someone else's experience. It belongs to our shared experience. I think that's probably the thing that I am most passionate about, is just trying to make these things accessible. So, I'll have a transcript of everything that I've said shortly after this. I'll turn that over to you, Hobbes, so you can caption this thing if you want to make use of that. But those kinds of things are really important to me. And they're really helpful as well, because I don't know if you've ever read the auto captions on YouTube, especially for an ADF ritual. If the ritual is not appropriately captioned, it is awful. It is just awful. And if you are hard of hearing or deaf, there's no way you're going to make any sense about what we're doing. And so those kinds of things are really important to me. And that's my big soapbox, my big social justice issue.
And I guess, go ahead, Jan.
Caryn, go ahead, because
it's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So one of the things that I do a lot of, that it kind of coasts along the side of my priest work, but is food security and like environmental justice in that way. And so it doesn't often like leap into what we do as a grove or what I do as an ADF priest. But this idea of like knowing where your food comes from, community gardening, and making sure that food deserts are less likely to occur, and helping out individual community members in becoming more sustainable themselves, if that is what they are interested in doing. So that's kind of my, like I said, it coasts kind of along that priest work and like, what did I do as a person? In addition to that, with our Grove, one of the things we've been really focused on is this idea of tolerance, but if you let everybody in, then it's going to be all wolves. Like if you let everybody into your group without saying, except the Nazis, then the Nazis are going to show up and they're going to take over. And so it's this idea of we're trying to be open to everyone who is wanting to be there, but also directing that in a specific, we want you here. We have made this a safe space. And if there are people here who threaten your safety, security, and feeling of belonging, we will make sure that they are no longer welcome. So it's this kind of dancing that line of being open and welcoming, but not to the assholes. Sorry, Hobbes, if that's going to screw with your placement on YouTube.
No, don't worry about that. That's totally fine.
And so, I guess what I was going to say is not far off what you're talking about, Jan. I guess I do this a little different, and I kind of long ago fell into the social justice fight on a very specific level. I spent 15 years of my professional career and another, I'm not going to say how many because then I'll really date myself, doing victims advocacy work. And I know that there is, and if you don't know it, it's because you haven't been maybe in ADF long enough to know that there is I guess, rumor, the white elephant in the room is sometimes people go, Carrion's intimidating or Carrion's scary or, something like that. And I think sometimes it is because I've spent so very long actively working in courtrooms and directly with victims, whether they be children or adolescents or adults. Sometimes the fight comes out when an issue happens where I see people who cannot advocate for themselves, and I switch into the advocate mode. As a professional helper, when people are victimized and power and control and basic rights have been taken from them by whatever has caused that to happen, sometimes they need someone in their court, and I've been that person many times. So I guess my look at social justice is from that inside place. And fighting systems and standing up when things aren't right and people get pushed down because of whatever iniquity happens to exist. And like I said, I've done that from a professional role, but I also don't separate the who and what I am as an ADF clergy person from that, because it does color my values, it colors my morals, it colors my vision of the future, because those things are merged. So I guess at the bare bones and the core of that is there are still people fighting for basic human rights, fighting to be safe, fighting to just be who and what they are. And I guess there is my place that I kind of stay in the social justice issues. It's on the inside of that place and helping people get what they need. Just we shouldn't probably, I feel bad that we have to talk about just people, their basic rights not or basic needs not being met, but we're still there in some respects. So
All right, thank you, Caryn. I just want to, I'm just looking at the chat to just, I don't want to say validate, but to to the amount of safety that you take so important. Aylin says, I have to say, Caryn, that the one time I met you in person, that you made me feel very safe, which is big for me because I'm afraid of everyone. So good job.
Awesome. Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other social justice?
Well, I don't have a whole lot to add to what the others said. I think I'm probably more focused on environmental and earth healing things, but like all the rest, we've really tried to make our grove open and inclusive while understanding that not everybody that walks through the door is going to be on the same page of music, and not everyone that walks through the door is going to make other people feel safe. And there have been many conversations on our part about, well, where do we draw our boundary lines? When do we know that person X needs to be shown the door because person X is making other people feel very uncomfortable, if not totally unsafe? And that's a fine line to walk, and there's a lot of gray area on the sides, and it's worth in every grove, and I have said this on the Council of Senior Druids many times, to have these discussions before person X walks through the door, so you understand where is your boundary line. And when you start seeing those types of behavior, you know where your boundary line is, and you know when someone crosses it. And we've addressed the accessibility many times, and we're doing it all over again, because this old house is almost 100 years old that our grove owns. And retrofitting it for accessibility would be a very, very high cost. So mostly we're looking at right now just making from the driveway to the sanctuary at least wheelchair accessible, and that's where that's probably going to take a lot of work, because it's over some ground that certain times of the years it's hard as a rock, and other times of the years your little wheelchair is going to sink right into the mud. And so actually we're having discussions on this right now.
One of the things that is I think worth mentioning is that the other thing that we do as a grove is we try and make sure that there is also shared time. So we use a tool called arementalkingtoomuch.com to make sure that people like me are not talking too much, because it does happen. By the way, right now, Hobbes, we're at 44% men speaking on this particular discussion. I'll drop the link in the chat to the webpage that we use for this, but that's something that is also useful, is finding tools and making use of them as best we can to make sure that we stay aware of the problems before we run into them.
Wow, that's really interesting. Okay. Anything else that you want to answer to that before we move on to the next one? No? All right. So we're almost at 2 o'clock. We got about another 30 minutes to go. We're doing great. Everyone feeling okay? I just want to check in. How is everyone feeling? Yes? You might want to put another log on that fire. It doesn't seem to be progressing very well there, Caryn. All right. So I've been making changes to the questions as we've been going along. What do I want to ask you now? How has your spiritual path evolved over time? Either from when you started your clergy training, or even from when the time you came into paganism? Like, how have you evolved over time?
Okay. So
Carrion's taking the gloves off here. I can already do. Okay.
no, because I've lived, a lot of life these days and been a, pagan for a really long time. My spiritual connection actually started deep rooted. I've done a lot of reflection on this. It started when I was in my teens, if not earlier, through the mentorship of my grandmother, who was an avid family historian and worked in genealogy. And, it grew from there. I guess I was first connected to the ancestors there. And so I never really fit into mainstream religious paradigms. It was always forcing it and no real fit. And everybody's saying, well, Caryn, you can't think that or you can't say that because that's either my fundamentalist members of my family would say that was the devil talking and that there were, I needed to be quiet about that. Or then you have the people that look at you when you can hear and see and feel, otherworldly spirits. It makes for real conflict early in life because you're either crazy or the devil's got you. From that place, I tried to find a religion that didn't tell me that. And I found some of the earth-based religions, wandered my way through Wicca and into, a VHS tape done in 1995 by ADF, and come across that and was like, are you serious? Because, while Wicca and Gardnerianism had some things to offer that was over and above what I had tried previously, the VHS tape that I watched caused me to explore more, caused me to get on the internet happened and people became more connected because believe me, my dedicant path didn't look like you guys' dedicant path. I got some mimeograph copies and none of the page numbers were accurate. And I don't know, it jumped all around and that's what I started with. Just dated myself, sorry. Joined ADF with absolutely no intention to do public anything. There was a part in my spirituality where I was, so for everybody who knows me pretty good, this is something that you may or may not know. Carrion is not an extrovert. Carrion is an introvert. And I know people find that hard to believe. I've actually professionally had that questioned by bosses and things. I'm what I call a forced extrovert. I very much like introverted things. I like being by myself. I like, quiet and, that sort of thing. So being out there and doing divination for people, belonging to a group, all of those things were very scary to me. I wasn't doing it. I didn't sing in front of people. I didn't speak in front of people. None of that. Never had any intention of doing that. And, at the time, and for those that have known me a minute, I was married to the Reverend Raven Mann, all right, who said, you have all these skills and you're going to keep them to yourself. He goes, well, I'm going to go join a grove. You can come or not. And I'm like, I'll join, but don't expect me to be doing anything. I said, if I'm going to do divination or something in ritual, because at that point we were a spiritual unit of two, and I was fine with that. And then we joined a grove. And so what I thought I was going to do is do divinatory seership kinds of stuff, because that was my real drive. And then I was going to tell him and he could pronounce it. Okay, that's how it was going to work. So to make a long story short, that grew into a connection with the goddess Brige. All right. And my strength to be the forced extrovert that I became largely was from working with her and believing in that and seeing how I could help people to a much greater degree if I was out there a little bit. So that is how, over time, to give you a little bit of detail. That's how I've got to the place that I am. And I mean, I'm glad I came out of that shell and, started doing things public and feeling good about that, because to me, it's all in service of the kindred. And the more people you can speak to that are like-minded, that might not know this great thing exists, the better. And that's what I have to say on that topic.
All right, thanks, Carrion. Although I was struck by this thought while you were talking early on. I was like, back in my day, the Dedekind path, it was uphill both ways, and I had to hold my stole over my head to not get it dirty, and we loved it.
Okay, Hobbes, there were no stoles. There was none of that.
No stoles. You had a stole. We didn't have a stole. We had ropes and we banged rocks together.
It was about like that.
All right. Anyone else like to speak about your evolution?
I'll go. So, like Carrion, I kind of discovered that I was pagan in middle school-ish. And I remember being really afraid to tell my parents. And when I finally told them, my mom told me, we don't care what you believe as long as you believe in something. So not allowed to be an atheist, but other than that, you're good to go. So I know that's a different experience than a lot of people have had as far as telling family members. But from there, I just kind of explored. I was really into mythology. And I joined Ohio State's Pagan Student Association, which is how I met folks from the Grove. And that really clicked. And so I joined the Grove specifically because that was a pagan community, not necessarily because I was super drawn to ADF, but it was the community that felt the most stable and the most welcoming. And so that's where I ended up. And Michael at one point told me, like, are you ever going to join the Grove? And I was like, I'll get there. Because I hung out with the Grove for like years before I officially joined ADF and joined the Grove. And then I delved into like heavy trance work, heavy divinatory work, and heavy magic work. And that was my focus, which is what drew me to the initiate work. And so I went through all of the initiate work. And then made the horrible decision. No, I had kids and everything like threw up in the air. My entire practice had to change and shift to make room for the way my life looked now. And so that initial, like having all of the heavy trance work, heavy divinatory work, my practice got smaller and more intimate. It moved from big magical workings, extended trance time, to praying to Hestia while I do things around the house. So it went from being able to have the time to be big and elaborate to becoming what feels more intimate and but smaller. So that's like my personal practice. And then my practice with the Grove actually grew. So like it shifted. So for me, it started as a very personal path, and then moved to this more service-oriented path with my home practice really simplifying.
I'll take a jump off of that. Sometimes we think about becoming a priest like it's a recognition of status attained, and it kind of is, but I suspect that most of us who've walked through that doorway are likely to say that it's far more about taking a first step, not a last step. Every day, I'm learning more about the way the cosmos was crafted and created. I find myself experiencing nuance in my practice that I didn't know was there. And I think that's one of the biggest things to know. If you're thinking about becoming a priest in ADF or anywhere else, you don't step out of the door fully formed or even newly minted. You cross the threshold in an extremely raw state, and the forge hammer hits you. You spend your initial time being hit pretty much all the time, and it, well, is kind of hard and annoying to figure out. But you do figure it out, and it changes you. Heck, we write one vocational statement, and it's designed to carry us through our work as ADF priests, but it doesn't. My vocation is markedly different than it was when I started, and that's cool. There isn't really anything anyone can tell you to prepare you for the work. It hits us all differently. Reverend Avende's article on things no one told you about being a priest, which they dropped into the chat earlier. And in fact, I will go ahead and drop it in again, just in case anyone's late coming in, but it's a spot on discussion for this. You don't really know what's on the other side of the door when you open it. You think you do. We all thought we knew, but I will tell you this, you can do it. I think that anyone can do it. I think that everyone is cut out for this work if they have the freedom to practice in their own way. And I think that because none of us were prepared, none of us are unchanged by it. We've all grown, and you will too. And here's the kicker, we'll help you grow into that role. You don't do it alone.
All right, thank you, Michael. Caryn, did you have anything to add?
Oh, just a few things. I mean, I agree with everything they said, and I was first drawn to paganism because I had been having experiences, otherworldly type things since I was about 3, and I needed something to help explain to me and teach me about what I was doing, and I will certainly date myself on this one. So, I mean, it's a visual y'all can keep. There I was with a floppy leather hat and a leather fringe jacket, sitting on the ground reading tarot cards in the smoking area of my high school, back when they had such things. That would have been like 75, 76, and my practice changed over time. I married a first husband. He had 2 children. So, and he was pagan. So we involved them into everything that we did. And then that moved me into the age of joining ADF. Everything I have learned in the clergy training program, even when I have bitched and moaned right through that course, I have learned something from every single one. And everything I learn, everything I read, I'm constantly changing and constantly growing. And I love the analogy, because people sometimes ask, well, how do you start introducing yourself to gods, and how is it this relationship comes about in your life? And my best analogy is, if you studied them and you're making these invocations and you're making offerings to them throughout the year in a grove type setting, sooner or later, you're going to begin to notice their influence in your life. And I use the analogy is that our relationships with the kindred is kind of like our relationships with people. And you have very close friends. I hope you do. I have some very close friends, at least one, that if you're in a crisis at 3 o'clock in the morning, you can call them and they will get up and they will help you, right? So those are the deities and allies that are closest to you. Now, you also have friends that you better wait until after they've had their first cup of coffee. But as long as you do that, there's probably some reciprocity going on there, and they'll talk to you, and then there are people that are just acquaintances. And before you start asking for their help, you might want to take them to lunch, because they're going to be like, wait, what? And this just grows over time. My initial altar was a tiny little thing, and now I have them all over my house, and I have them in my yard. And I talk to a whole lot of people, and there are those that I consider my very closest friends, and those who are close acquaintances that I know I can depend on if I need it. And then there's everybody else. And these guys, sometimes they move a little bit further away and others move a little closer. And that's normal. I mean, you've got friends like that. They move into and out of your life over time. And that's just the way it works. And if you want to develop a relationship with a member of the kindred, you've got to work on that. It's not going to just drop into your lap. You've got to work on it. And so, every step I take is building on everything I've done before. And I wouldn't have it any other way.
Unmute. Oh, there we go. All right. I think everyone's had their chance to speak on this. We are coming on to 10 after 2. I have a couple of. I'm hoping I'll have a chance to ask one of these questions, but let's see. I'm going to combine these two questions together. So a lot of these questions are coming from membership. This was something I had done when I first started talking about doing these panel discussions. I put out a call to the membership and said, if you could ask the clergy anything, give me a list, tell me what you would ask them, and then I compile the list, and that's where I'm getting these questions from. So I have these two questions, and I think they're related, so I'm going to ask them both at the same time, and we're going to talk about them. So if there were one aspect of your role that you could change, what would it be? And the second part of that question is, can you name one type of infrastructure that ADF could establish for the ADF community that would strengthen our faith and secure the organization for future generations? They kind of sound like separate questions, but they're both talking about change within ADF. So
can you repeat them, Hobbes?
So the first one was, if there was one aspect of your role, they sound like different questions actually now. I don't know. Let's just go with the first question because it's big. So forget the second part. If there was one aspect of your role that you could change as clergy, one, please, what would it be?
Well, perception is what I would have to say. I would very much like to have, when it comes to viewing ADF clergy in general and our role within the organization, I would love perception to grow closer to what the reality is. And I think that events like this, where we actually get a chance to be able, to talk and interact with memberships, and, hopefully the return of festivals where people actually get to meet people. The clergy folk in ADF, over the years that I've been looking, sometimes, and not always is it because that, how do I want to say this? Clergy are people too. Sometimes somebody behaves badly and then it's a reflection on us all. And I get that just because you're a clergy person doesn't make you perfect, doesn't mean you didn't do it. But largely, there have been times in my role as a clergy that I feel less than respected just because I have that title or I have that association. And some of that I feel is a little bit unfair, because I think, largely the clergy are a group of well-meaning individuals trying to help the organization grow and the members get what they need. And while we are not perfect, I really do think that is the truest of intention in the hearts of most of us, if not all of us. So I'd love to see the overall perception, like I said, grow closer to the reality of what I know to be true from the last many years that I've been a clergy person in the organization.
So I'm going to clip in because I think that I can answer both of these questions with kind of the same thing. The thing that I would change to improve the way that we connect as a faith, or we want to use that word, as Druids in ADF, is I would remove the burden of trying to respond to spiritual things from the Mother Grove and pull it into the clergy council. Let the priests answer or have responsibility for answering things that come up. If there's a hurricane or something like that, or if there's social justice protests or things like that, those belong in a group of professional priests. They don't belong with necessarily an elected body. And I don't say that to say that the Mother Grove is not capable of doing those things, but I think the Mother Grove has that responsibility, and they don't need to have that on top of everything else that they have to do. And it's not fair to the Mother Grove to be directing the spirituality of our members if they're not all priests and they just kind of stumbled into a role or backfilled a role, or, you know, they run our treasury for all those things. Those kinds of things, I think, are best set to the clergy council. And if we take an issue, if it rises up to the level of, hey, ADF needs to respond to this, turn it over to the priests. Let us come up with something that is spiritual and that, you know, fills that need for the folk. Again, I don't want to suggest that the Mother Grove can't do it, because the Mother Grove has a lot of priests on it. And while I may personally long for the days of discussions about limiting or even removing our priests from the Mother Grove, and creating a structure where we encourage them to have time and freedom to create and build rather than sit and do administrative tasks, that's something that I think, I really think that it's unfair to say, well, the Mother Grove needs to put out a statement on this. They don't. The clergy council needs to put out a statement on it. We need to look to our priests and we need to say, hey, priests, you got an opinion? Someone's going to put something out. And I think they can do it faster and more agile, and I think it would work out a little bit better. So that's one thing that I would definitely change, both in my own role and within ADF at large. I think that we missed something with that.
All of that. That was my answer to the second question.
Well, do you have another thought?
As far as the personal, like, changes to my personal role, I don't know that I like what I do, and I kind of like where things sit. I will say, as a stay-at-home parent who spends the majority of my work time that's not with the kids doing priest work, it would be really great to have some sort of stipend where I could contribute to my family's financial stability. I don't foresee that happening in my lifetime. I don't necessarily see that happening. But I think that would be great to help put us on a level with other established faiths, is the ability to really allow our priests to devote more of their time to this vocation. And speaking to that on like a different level, like, I was a teacher for 6 or 7 years, and stereotypically, you know, teachers don't get paid a lot. And so there was this whole thing of like, this is what I love doing, but you have to temper that with the amount of time you're spending doing something and the ability to support your basic living needs. So like, that would be something that I would change to this role of clergy. And then if I have to pick something that is different than let's remove the spiritual obligation from the Mother Grove, if I have to pick something else, I would say better prepare our priests for the pastoral work. Because right now our clergy program does a great job of does a good job of training us to be liturgists and deal with special occasion rituals and do the ancient priest thing, which is observe the high days, make the sacrifices, keep the old bargains. Like, we got that. But when people in the community with a culture that has this overculture of Christian baggage of when you hear the word priest, you expect someone who will listen to your problems. And so I think our clergy training program to better support the membership would be very well served by adding in training to help us be better listeners and better able to support the membership with these more pastoral concerns.
All right, thank you, Jen. Caryn, did you have any thoughts on that? Something you'd like to change about your role?
Well, like I said earlier, I am always a priest, but there are times that I'm wearing other hats within ADF. And one of my focuses and soapboxes that I've been up on for many, many years is teaching more leadership skills, group dynamics, given situations and talking about, well, how would you respond in these types of things, is very much something I want to do. And Drum gave me the leadership program that was proposed a number of years ago, and it did make it through the Council of Law. And I've been trying to find a way to incorporate this into the training of the Council of Senior Druids, which makes a great deal of sense. And it falls right into what Jan was just talking about, is learning how to deal with situations and working on how you're going to do that. And starting at the Council of Senior Druids is kind of like starting at the baseline level. And I really thought when I started this that I would have at least a handful of people that go, yeah, we're going to help you with this. And that didn't happen. So I've been having problems with my eyes for the last 2 years. And then there's COVID. And at any rate, it's on the back burner. I still want to do it. It's just, I'm having a lot of other issues that I have to deal with. And this is another clergy thing, is all of us have lives. Many of us have groves. Groves occasionally have serious group dynamic issues. And of course they look to the priest to help mediate that. Unfortunately, as the priest, you're probably going to have your foot or hands in both sides of this situation, which means you're probably not the best person to mediate it. And I've read a lot of books on this over the years and experienced a number of things. And one of the things I've learned from other spiritual path sources, because we don't have a whole lot of books on this, is that is the effect these schisms and conflicts and things can have on the priest and their very desire to continue this work. And I'm reading one right now called The Toxic Congregation: How to Heal the Soul of Your Church by G. Lord Rediger, author of Clergy Killers. And these are books about clergy going through something so bad within their group that they lose their faith. And that would be horrible. And I don't ever want to see that happen. But so if I could do anything, that I would introduce, yes, counseling of some sort, active listening skill sets, and understanding of group dynamics. And when there is a conflict, it's not all your fault, and you're probably not going to be able to fix it no matter how hard you try. And these are important, very important things to understand as clergy, because we've seen clergy that they come up against a brick wall about something, and and then they walk away. And I think that's really sad, regardless of what faith it is. So yes, that's it.
Could I say something before we
Sure.
close this topic? Because I guess I wanted to comment a little bit about some of the things that have been said by some other people, because while I agree with some of them, there are a couple things I see a little differently. And I guess I'm speaking about infrastructure changes. So I'm all about planned, informed change. And I think that's how we've got to this place, because I know the church that I joined, many years ago is not the church I belong to today. It's because we've made, some considerable positive growth. Back to, some of the infrastructure potential, visionary changes that Michael was talking about. The board of directors being split from, dealing with anything that would be, the spiritual nature of the church, I kind of see, I guess, as a little bit dangerous. I see the model we have now as similar to the boards of directors for other mainstream faiths, where, there are some priests involved, that the Mother Grove is headed by the AD who is a priest, mirrors kind of the mainstream, society that we're getting more accepted by in some respects. There's really nothing in my mind that keeps the CC as a council from commenting or coming together and putting forth information when spiritual matters happen and we want to, have a spiritual message for folks. I don't really feel inhibited that we couldn't do that by our our current structure as we have it. The other thing of it is, I know several people talked about, training needs and skills for clergy that look more like counseling type skills. It was one of the motivations for why I went back after being out of school for 24 years and got my master's degree, is so that I could teach some of those things. And I have, and I plan to continue to do that a little more in the future. And by that, I mean teaching professional helping skills, active listening, things like self-care, and making that available in a taught way to clergy folks, because I do agree that is a need. And people seek us because in mainstream culture, we learn as children that, people seek priests when they need help with all kinds of stuff. And, the issues of well-being are one of those things, not only that, but for grief and loss and rites of passage, transitions, all of that. So, we don't want to look at folks that come to us and say, well, we don't do that. We only lead ritual or something like that. And you're going to have to seek out counseling or therapy or whatever from, mainstream clergy people. That makes no sense for the health and vitality of our church going forward. In my mind, some of the stuff we're talking about is infrastructure change. I'm waiting to see, because I'm sure most of you know that there is an organizational review committee that's been put together, both of Mother Grove members and general members of the organization. I'm the chair of that committee, and we are really going through anything and everything we can to look at structure and look at, there's gaps in some stuff because we grew fast. And from point A to point B, really, we've come leaps and bounds in 25 years. And so it causes gaps when you grow like that. And, I want to see what the recommendations look like when that work's done. I'm very hopeful that it's going to lead to something really good. And I guess, I just wanted to say a couple things about infrastructure. And I'm hoping we're going to have some good recommendations and guidance from that committee to the Mother Grove, so that other changes can be made in infrastructure for the future that are well researched and make sense, and get us to somewhere better, I guess, for us all.
All right, we are now at 2:30. I wish we'd had more time to talk about infrastructure, but we've run out of time on the planned. I also had this question I really, really wanted to ask, but it's pineapple on pizza. Which gods would approve of such culinary blasphemy? But we don't have time. I want to open the floor now to the audience, the participants who have been very graciously sitting and listening to share your insight and wisdom with us. So if I'd like to open the floor now to the participants. Does anyone here have a question they would like to ask our panelists? Unmute and ask your question. Go ahead.
I'll go first. I had a question for Carrion, actually, as far as Order of the Dead stuff is concerned. I mean, this is completely turning around from the mechanics of ADF and back into the spiritual matters of communicating between the dead and the living. And I recently had a relative die that was her version of Christianity. She was very Christian, and her version of Christianity is not necessarily something that I would approve of. And I was avoiding honoring her we do like weekly ceremonies called Walk with the Old Ones. So they're informal, and they're like usually prayers and things like that at Cedar Lake Grove. And I had sort of, I was going to do like an offering to her of her favorite drink, which is bourbon and water. And, like speak to her directly. But I was avoiding bringing it up in our pagan ritual, because I don't think that she would have, while she was nice to me in life, and she was never passive aggressive about it, I don't think that she would approve of being pulled into a pagan ceremony. How do you deal with the dead that are in a tradition that wouldn't necessarily approve of paganism? And do you connect with them, or do you do any sort of mediation between the living and those ancestors?
Okay, so I don't see relationships with the dead as built or a whole lot different than I do with the living. I like the thoughts that you shared, Aurora, about being respectful of what someone else might want. And I guess that's why I bring this up. For me, I'd ask, if you have a personal practice, and if you're not able to ask yourself, find somebody that can, because what I would do is I would ask, would you be offended by me honoring you in this way? I want to remember you. Because sometimes what I found is that stuff changes once somebody dies, and they want to be remembered. And if the opportunity to be remembered comes in the form of somebody remembering you at a pagan holiday, Samhain or something, or at their personal shrine, that's way better than not being remembered at all. Because that's one of the things that the dead seek. But whether it be do a funeral for somebody who's not an ADF Druid, I don't believe in just doing stuff and doing stuff because we think it's a good idea. I do a lot of asking. Not unlike I would if I was going to do something for a living person. Would you be offended if I did this? Would this be okay with you? I mean, we would ask the living, why wouldn't we ask the dead? And it may just surprise you. It may be okay. Does that answer your question?
That's a good point. I actually had a very similar thought this morning when I was thinking about it. Just like, because she was very devoted to family and history and genealogy and keeping records. She had a very interesting hobby of taking pictures. Like that was her camera was like her third arm, right? And she did it. I found out later that she did it because she wanted to keep these memories, and she would look back on it and remember things, and then like talk to people later about the conversations that she had with them. And she had little index cards of like little things that people liked and everything like that. It was very important. And she was very interested in like genealogy and keeping track of the family history. So really, when she died, it was like the burning down of a library almost. And so I think that it would be more important to her to be remembered than be honored in a place that she didn't necessarily approve of, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a good point. Thanks.
Hi, I've recently been going through a situation. My born-again Christian aunt was diagnosed 9 weeks ago with AML leukemia. She's been unable to tolerate chemo. Her blood tests keep showing, at this point, she has no white cells and very few red cells. She's within the last 2 weeks, based on her doctor's estimate. She and I were always close, and we still are, in fact, closer. She is getting the biggest kick out of telling people that her pagan niece is praying for her. Her perspective is a prayer is a prayer. We live far apart. She's in Syracuse, New York, and I'm in Southeast Tennessee. We have been texting every day, sometimes for long periods. Her faith is astonishing. Her strength is astonishing. Her acceptance is astonishing. She says it that I'm walking her journey with her journey from life to death. And that the things that I'm texting her, the pictures and the gifts that GIF that I've been sending her are keeping her in good spirits. In some ways, this has been somewhat difficult for me. It's kind of like, you know, I didn't sign up for this. And yet this aunt is so beloved to me that I would never say no to her. I will stay in contact with her till the very end. This is where I would see some sort of training of the priests to help me to keep my personal vow that I will stay with her till the end. I guess that's it. Thank you for listening.
We are happy to help where we can, Deb. I have my small office altar here lit up for you and for your aunt. Jan has dropped some things into the chat as well. So take a look. And if there's anything that we can do, please feel free to reach out.
And I guess the one thing that I want to offer, Deb, is make sure as you're walking this walk with her that you take care of you. Because when you're trying to support somebody in a transition like that, you got to make sure first and foremost you take care of yourself, because otherwise you won't have enough to give to get through the place you're going. You know, also things that stuck out in what you were saying to me is you talked about her remarkable faith. Make sure she knows that and that you see that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I've never had a problem. I've supported many Christian folks, even if it was more fundamentalist Christian folks, you know, whether it be death, dying, childbirth, whatever. Because I'm a polytheist, I'm not in any way, shape, or form do I feel unequipped to support somebody in their faith to get to where they want to go and be with the God that they want to be with. You know, support. And while I identify as a polytheistic pagan, that's not everybody. So, you know, what someone needs when they're going through that transition, that's about that individual. And you try to muster that and walk that with them, whatever that looks like. And you really never know because it's about them and what they need and not really about what, you know, we want to offer, because sometimes that doesn't fit what somebody needs.
Right.
You know? And once again, like Michael said, you know, you can reach out, I'm sure, to any of us. If you have questions, you need support yourself, because that is part of taking care of yourself. When you are walking through something like that, don't do it in isolation. You know, have some people that you can talk to and bounce the stuff off of, because it's not easy. It's actually very difficult and very draining. So, you know, lean on somebody, reach out to somebody. There's no problem with saying, I need somebody to help me.
Thank you.
The other piece that I heard, Deb, is that you have this concern that you've made this promise and you're afraid you won't be able to keep it. Am I understanding that correctly?
I have not verbalized my promise to her, but I have promised myself within my heart that I will stay with her till the end.
I would say that's definitely an area where if you feel yourself faltering on that, and it is giving you personal distress that you feel like you're faltering on that, to reach out to the clergy folk, because we can help walk with you through that. Like, we can't change it, we can't help
Right.
it, but you know, we can be there to light a candle alongside you. I like to refer to it as when your candle goes out, that's what we're for. We light the other candle so that the light is still there. And so I would definitely say, you know, don't feel like you're alone in this. And anyone who's like, not even this scenario, anyone who has made an oath and you're feeling like, oh crap, this is hard now. Part of oath taking is this expectation of the community to not just hold you to it, but help you with it. So if that's where you're at and you're struggling holding that, reach out. We can carry the light while you can't do it.
It's interesting. You're mentioning the light going out. My original prayers to my gods and to her God, because I do respect her choice, because I'm seeing her choice giving her strength in her life and now as she's dying. I was at one of the rituals for Imbolc and had a candle blast and lit it. And within 24 hours, it had gone out. At this point, they were still hoping to be able to give her chemo. So I lit an LED candle that had not been used yet. And within 24 hours, that went out. I interpreted that as a message that the part of the prayer that she be healed has been denied by the gods. They're saying it's her time. And now I'm praying that she is comfortable, that she is not in pain, that she knows how much she's loved. And I'm doing my part to make that happen. And I am having enough time to take care of my emotional needs regarding this. My mom and I talked. This is my mom's youngest sister. And the two of us can talk about our feelings with what's going on. But I appreciate knowing that people will be there, because this was not a chosen part of my path. And it seems that all of the gods are saying, you need to do this.
Deb, I would encourage you to reach out to the clergy, that you, any of these people, I'm sure, will make time for you. I just want to be able to leave some time here in the last 15 minutes of this segment for some other people to ask their questions.
Right, I was done.
But yeah, but thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
All right, is there anyone else who have a question they would like to ask?
Hi, my name is Tasha, and I had a question for the clergy with regards to the mental aspect of the trance work and meditation in preparation of moving into the clergy training. I'm completing my dedicant's path right now. And right now, when I'm working on that aspect of it, I'm finding that everything that I do is not enough, but I'm not sure where I'm supposed to go with it either. Because meditation has been part of my spiritual and personal practice for longer than I've been a druid. So I was just looking to hope to get some advice, or even just some personal experience from you of where that part of your path came from and how it worked for you.
Oh, I can talk about some early failure. No, for real. That was a stumbling point that caused me to take 4 years to do my dedicant program. That concept of sitting in silence or even focal point meditation did not come naturally to me. And I know, as Jan has talked about, how her practice changed over time because she had kids and all of this stuff. I had young kids at the time that I was embarking on that, which made it even more difficult. Couple of times I almost gave up because my journal was just full of, well, that didn't work. And I tried to do this and that didn't work. And, then I discovered guided visualization and trance, and that something, I knew it couldn't be that easy because it was something that I had always done. And once I figured out, I guess I came kind of backwards to meditation. Once I figured out trance and movement types of concentration, the mental discipline to do meditation came easier, if that makes any sense. But I will tell you that it wasn't until after I was already in clergy training that I really got myself, to the place where I felt any kind of success with meditation whatsoever. So I don't know, your mileage may vary, but I had a ton of failure before I ever had success in that area.
I'll speak to the mental discipline chunk of the DP kind of. So, hi, I'm neurodivergent. And so there are some aspects of when we hear meditation that just do not work for me. So like Caryn mentioned about once she learned about this, the active meditation and the movement-based meditations, like those were super helpful to me. But if you take a step back from just the scary meditation word and think, why are we doing this? Like, why does the DP ask you for mental discipline? Well, the reason it asks you for mental discipline is so that you can be in ritual when you're in ritual. You're not distracted by the to-do list that you've been putting off. Yes, you turned the oven off. Like all of these things, you're able to, the mental discipline is being able to be in ritual when you're in ritual. And so for some people, being in ritual looks like knitting or crocheting so that your hands have something to do that lets your brain be present. For some people, that might look like, it might look like the quiet meditation. It might look like sitting cross-legged and, kind of emptying your brain. But whatever it is, the things that you're teaching in mental discipline is to give you that ritual focus, which Rob said in the chat. And the other piece of that, when you then take that into trance, is the ability to remember your trance work. So the mental discipline allows you to, once you've learned how to go into trance, it allows you to have kind of that piece in the back of your head that isn't driving the trance work, but is sitting there and kind of observing and listening, so that then when you come back out of trance, you're able to successfully bring the tools and the knowledge gained back with you. And so the mental discipline, the task isn't empty your brain and have this space. The task is be able to focus and remember on what you're doing at the time you're doing it. So I don't know if that helps. I hope it does.
It makes me, Jan, just rethink sometimes that maybe we should be starting out teaching mindfulness and how to be present before we go jump off the deep end and try to teach trance and meditation.
See also the chapter I wrote in the Hearthkeeper's Way.
Because really, I think mindfulness is the easier in.
Thanks, that's really helpful. It's like that purpose thing is helpful because I can meditate and I can focus, I can lead ritual. I act as a senior druid for my grove. And it's just like, I can do it for my personal self, but understanding its purpose in the Dedekind path is very helpful. Thank you.
All right, we're going on 7 minutes left in this portion. Does anyone have a last question they would like to ask before we close it off? Because I want to be respectful of the time for the panel discussion and let these lovely people go back to their lives. So is there anyone else with a final question for these panelists?
Ask us things. You have questions.
I have one.
There we go.
A little bit about things we talked about in the past, or you've talked about in the past, as far as working with deities, working with the dead. I had a question about how do you incorporate the third kindred, the nature spirits, into your priestcraft? And what do you see the value in working with the natural world and nature spirits and relating them to the greater community, to ADF, to your wider pagan community? And especially when a lot of pagans are now, living in urban or suburban environments and may have problems connecting with the natural world on their own.
Go, Caryn. I have thoughts, but I know you do.
Me? I can tell you that my grove, it is an urban druid sanctuary. And So, regularly during a high rite, Baltimore City sings us the song of his people. The sirens go by, the helicopters go overhead, and the whole bit. But we have a back corner of our yard that is very wild, particularly with invasive species. So one of the things we're doing right now is figuring out a plan to remove the invasive species and bring in more local plants and understory types of plants that would support the nature of the yard and the nature spirits. In Baltimore, ADF loves to throw seeds and apples and things on the ground. We cannot do that. We cannot do that because that is considered feeding the rats. And so, we had to rethink bird feeders and water up off the ground. And, but it has caused all of us to have a conversation about what is native to our land, what types of trees, bushes, understory plants could we put in that will feed the wildlife, that won't get us in trouble with the city of Baltimore, and still do what we like to do. And many of us have gone out, and there's any number of programs in the city where you can volunteer to do some stuff on land. But one of the things I do, Aurora mentioned earlier, is that we have a weekly service. We've been doing this for 25, 6 or 7 years, something along these lines. ADF likes to call these blessing rites these days, but we were doing it 10 years before Kirk came up with that term. So we feel like we've got squatters' rights. But anyway, one of the things I like to do every Sunday is point out the changes, because it is slightly different every single week. Look, such and such is blooming now, and call their attention to it. Such and such birds are in the area. We have a Cooper's hawk that flies in and out periodically. And there's a fox that lives behind our neighbor's garage that the tenants can hear it doing that fox squeal at night. And so there is evidence all around. You just have to be open to it and pay attention and start noticing when the trees, what specific trees are starting to leaf out right now. Are the trees and bushes, if you actually have a yard, are they providing food or flower sources to the insects and the birds and squirrels, whatever, in your area? Or are they invasive species that nothing here can eat those seeds? They're just going to create more trees. And these are just some of the ideas that you can do as you go through the wheel of the year. You could keep a little journal, particularly if you're already doing DP, you might be keeping a journal. What do you notice different? And it maybe not each week, because you might not notice it at first, what kinds of small changes are happening. But you could, once you start getting used to the plants in your area, you begin to notice how things change with the seasons. And you see the return and the wheel happening. And that's one of the things I've recommended for people doing the DP, and that whole nature awareness part of it is start paying attention. No, you're not going to be good at it first. That's okay. That's not the part that matters. I don't know. Maybe that helped. Maybe it didn't.
I think it's interesting that you ask this, because in writing the when I wrote the children's education program for pagan kids. It's mostly adults who ask the question, how do I honor the nature spirits? Because the kids are there. Like, they need things to be tangible. And so nature spirits are like the most tangible thing. And so like Caryn was talking about this, keeping a nature journal, like one of the things I have in there for the kids to do every week is to go on a nature walk. And depending on the age, they can write about it, they can draw pictures, they can whatever. So it's interesting because the kids are there. They have this connection to the nature spirits. For me, the connection comes mostly to native plants and food security. So like I have done a lot of research into our county laws about what kind of things I'm allowed to have. So I raise rabbits for meat, which provides us sustainability. I have a vegetable garden that has kind of grown each year. This year, I'm going to grow additional plants to kind of give to other Grove members to help them with food security. I have a pollinator garden. I have plants that are specifically for my rabbits. So a lot of it is kind of in this personal atmosphere for me. And I can't see who said that, but if you don't have a garden, farmers markets are a great way to make that connection. If you don't have the ability or the thumb or the space to do the gardening yourself, making connections, reading labels in grocery stores about like, where did this come from? Did it come from Mexico or did it come from Indiana? Like, so that kind of thing. And then energy sources, like just being aware of water savings, where your power comes from. All of that for me is nature spirit-y.
Okay. All right. It is now 3 o'clock. I'm going to officially call this to a close. Before I turn the recording off, I want to thank our panelists, Jan Avende, Carrion Mann, Caryn Macluan. Oh my gosh, I don't. Your name. I'm drawing a blank on your family name because it's not.
Macluan.
Caryn Macluan. I'm very sorry. And, Michael J. Dangler for joining us for the second pour. Thank you, everyone who sitting in the audience and asking your questions and enjoying the panel discussion. I'm your host, Hobbes, and I'm going to officially stop recording right now.